In the harsh Wyoming territory of 1879, mountain man Ezra Blackstone faces an impossible choice when a wealthy merchant offers him enough money to survive the brutal winter, but only if he sells 7-year-old Lily, the half-Cherokee girl he's reluctantly cared for since her mother's death. When Lily looks up at him with those trusting dark eyes and asks the question that shatters his heart, will Ezra choose gold over the child who's become his unexpected salvation? Ezra Blackstone's hands shook as he counted the last 3 gold pieces in his leather pouch. The Wyoming Territory wind howled through the cracks of his tiny cabin, and outside, the first October snow of 1879 was already painting the ground white. Winter was coming fast, and he didn't have nearly enough money to buy food and supplies for 2 people. He looked across the small room at 7-year-old Lily, who sat quietly on her wooden crate, brushing the hair of her corn-husk doll. Her own hair was the color of wheat, nothing like his dark beard and weathered face. She wasn't his real daughter. Her Cherokee mother had died 3 summers ago, leaving the child with nowhere else to go. The mission folks had practically begged him to take her in. "Mr. Ezra," Lily said softly, not looking up from her doll, "are we going to have enough food this winter?" The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. Smart girl, always asking the hard questions he didn't want to answer. He'd been asking himself the same thing every night for weeks. 3 gold pieces wouldn't buy enough supplies to last until spring. Not even close. "We'll figure something out, little bird," he said, using the nickname that had slipped out one day and somehow stuck. But even as he said it, his mind was spinning with worry. That's when he heard the horses outside. Through the frosted window, he could see 3 men on horseback approaching his cabin. Their leader was Samuel Crowley, a traveling merchant who bought and sold everything from furs to furniture. Ezra had traded with him before, but something about the man's smile always made his skin crawl. "Stay inside," Ezra told Lily, grabbing his coat and stepping out into the cold. "Blackstone," Crowley called out, his breath making white clouds in the freezing air. "Heard you might be having some money troubles. Thought I'd stop by and see if we could help each other out." Ezra crossed his arms. "What kind of help?" Crowley's eyes moved past him to the cabin window, where Lily's small face was pressed against the glass. "That little half-breed girl of yours is getting to be quite the young lady. Pretty thing. I know some rich families back in St. Louis who are looking for household help. They pay good money for children who can be trained up proper." The words made Ezra's blood turn cold. "You're talking about selling her?" "I'm talking about giving her a chance at a real life," Crowley said smoothly. "And giving you enough money to survive the winter. Maybe even buy yourself a proper farm come spring." Behind him, one of Crowley's men chuckled. "Better than watching both of you starve to death out here in the middle of nowhere." Ezra's hands curled into fists, but before he could answer, he heard something that made his heart sink. The cabin door creaked open behind him, and Lily's small voice carried across the cold air. "Mr. Ezra, what does he mean about selling me?" The silence that followed Lily's question seemed to stretch on forever. Ezra turned to see her standing in the doorway, still clutching her corn-husk doll, her dark eyes wide with a fear that no 7-year-old should have to feel. The winter wind whipped around them, but suddenly the cold seemed to come from somewhere much deeper. "Now see here, little miss," Crowley said, sliding down from his horse with that fake friendly smile. "Nobody's talking about selling anybody. We're talking about finding you a nice home with a real family. People with big houses and fancy clothes and all the food you could ever want." Lily took a step backward, bumping into Ezra's legs. "But this is my home. Mr. Ezra takes care of me." "Does he now?" Crowley's voice turned harder. "Tell me, child, when was the last time you had a proper dress? Or shoes that weren't falling apart? Or meat that wasn't stringy rabbit?" Ezra wanted to speak up, to defend himself, but the merchant's words cut deep because they were true. He'd done his best, but his best wasn't much. Lily's dress was patched in 3 places. Her shoes were too small, and they'd been living on whatever he could hunt or trap for months. "She's not for sale," Ezra said finally, but his voice came out quieter than he'd meant it to. Crowley pulled out a thick roll of money from his coat. $500, Blackstone. More money than you've seen in your whole life. Enough to buy land, build a real house, maybe even find yourself a wife. All for one little girl who isn't even your blood." The money seemed to glow in the afternoon light. $500. It really was more than Ezra had ever seen at one time. With that much money, he could buy a farm somewhere warm, somewhere safe. He could have a real life instead of just scraping by in this frozen wilderness. But when he looked down at Lily, something twisted in his chest. She was staring up at him with those trusting eyes, waiting for him to protect her the way he'd promised her mother he would. The way he'd been trying to do for 3 years, even when he didn't know how. The answer is no, he said, louder this time. Crowley's smile disappeared. Think about it, Mountain Man. Winter's coming, and you got nothing. I'll be back in 2 days for your final answer. He swung back up onto his horse. Don't let pride make you both starve. As the 3 men rode away, Ezra felt Lily's small hand slip into his. Her fingers were ice cold, but they held on tight. Mr. Ezra, she whispered, you won't really sell me, will you? Like my real papa did? The question hit him like lightning, and suddenly he understood. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to get rid of her. Her own father had given her away once before, and now she was terrified it was going to happen again. Looking down at her frightened face, Ezra realized that maybe the most important question wasn't whether he had enough money to survive the winter. Maybe the real question was whether he was going to be the kind of man who kept his promises, or the kind who broke them when things got hard. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, like angry drums, as Ezra stared into their small campfire. The flames danced and popped, throwing wild shadows on the rocks around them. He couldn't get Crowley's words out of his head. The merchant's offer kept spinning in his mind like a coin that wouldn't stop flipping. Lily sat on her blanket nearby, brushing her doll's yarn hair with gentle fingers. She hadn't said much since they left the trading post that morning, but Ezra could feel her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Kids always knew when grown-ups were thinking heavy thoughts. The wind picked up, making their fire bend and twist. Ezra pulled his coat tighter and added another stick to the flames. Winter was coming fast to the Wyoming territory. He could smell it in the air. That sharp, cold smell that meant trouble for folks without enough supplies. Mr. Ezra? Lily's voice was so quiet he almost missed it over the crackling fire. Yes, child? She hugged her doll closer to her chest. That man at the trading post. What did he mean about St. Louis? Ezra's stomach dropped like a stone in deep water. He'd hoped she hadn't understood Crowley's words. But kids heard everything. They always did. Nothing you need to worry about, Lily, just grown-up talk. But Lily wasn't fooled. She was small, but she wasn't stupid. Living on the frontier made kids grow up fast, and she'd already seen more hardship than most children twice her age. My real papa used to talk to men like that, she whispered. Men with fancy clothes and money in their pockets. Ezra's hands stopped moving. He'd been poking at the fire with a long stick, but now he held it still. What kind of talk? About finding me a good home. A place where I could learn proper manners and how to read fancy books. Lily's voice got smaller with each word. But I already had a home with him and Mama. I didn't need a different one. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the storm clouds. Ezra felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the coming weather. But your papa, he kept you, didn't he? You stayed with your family? Lily shook her head slowly. After Mama died having the baby that didn't make it, Papa said I was too much work. He took me to the mission and told Sister Mary I needed a Christian home. Said it was for my own good. The stick in Ezra's hand snapped in half. He hadn't realized how tight he'd been gripping it. And the mission folks. They found you that home? They tried. But the families didn't want a half-breed girl. Too Indian for the white folks. Too white for the Indians. Lily looked up at him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. That's when you came along, needing help with your camp and such. Ezra stared at her across the firelight. For 3 years, he thought he was doing her a favor by taking her in, giving her food and shelter when no one else would. But now, he saw the truth that had been right in front of him all along. She'd saved him, not the other way around. Mr. Ezra? Her voice was barely a whisper now. Are you going to sell me like Papa did? The words hit him like a lightning bolt. Ezra felt his throat close up, and his eyes began to burn. Before he could stop them, tears started rolling down his cheeks, disappearing into his thick beard. He tried to speak, but no words came out. How could he answer that question when he wasn't sure of the answer himself? The attack came at dawn when the world was painted silver with morning mist. Ezra woke to the sound of horses moving too quietly through the brush around their camp. His hand found his rifle before his eyes were fully open, and he knew they were in trouble. "Lily," he whispered urgently, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up, but don't make a sound." Her eyes opened instantly, alert in the way children learned to be when danger was always close. She'd heard the horses too. Living in the wild territory taught you to trust your ears above all else. Through the gray light, Ezra counted at least 4 riders circling their small camp like wolves around a wounded deer. Their faces were covered with bandanas, and their guns caught what little light filtered through the morning clouds. "Well, well," called out the leader, a tall man on a black horse. "Look what we found, boys. The mountain man who struck it rich up north." Ezra's blood turned cold. Word traveled fast in the territory, especially word about gold. He should have been more careful, should have kept their success quiet. But he'd needed supplies for winter, and that meant trading with folks who talked too much. "Don't know what you're talking about, friend," Ezra called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're just passing through." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that made the horses stamp their feet nervously. "Now don't go lying to us, Blackstone. We know all about that leather pouch you carry. The one full of enough gold dust to make a man rich." Lily pressed herself against Ezra's side, her doll clutched so tight her knuckles were white. He could feel her trembling, but she didn't make a sound. Brave girl. Too brave for her own good sometimes. "Even if I had gold, what makes you think I'd hand it over to a bunch of cowards hiding behind face rags?" "Because," the leader said, drawing his gun in one smooth motion, "we've got something you value more than gold." The other 3 riders moved closer, their weapons all pointed at Lily. Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He'd faced down bears and mountain cats, survived blizzards that killed stronger men, but nothing had ever scared him like seeing those guns aimed at the little girl beside him. "That's right, mountain man. One word from me, and your little half-breed ward becomes buzzard food. But we're reasonable men. Give us the gold, and we'll ride away peaceful-like." Ezra's mind raced through the possibilities. 4 against 1 were bad odds, especially with Lily in the line of fire. His rifle was good, but not good enough to drop 4 men before they could hurt her. The gold pouch at his belt suddenly felt heavier than a millstone. 3 years of back-breaking work, countless hours bent over freezing streams, sifting through gravel and sand for tiny flecks of precious metal. It was their future, their hope for survival through the brutal winter ahead. Without it, they'd likely freeze or starve before spring came again. But as he looked down at Lily's frightened face, something inside him shifted and settled into place like a puzzle piece, finding its proper spot. The gold was just metal, cold, lifeless stuff that men killed for and died pursuing. But this child, she was warm and alive and trusting. She was laughter around their campfire and small hands helping with camp chores. She was hope for something better than the empty life he'd been living since his wife died. "Take it," he said quietly, pulling the leather pouch from his belt. "Take the gold and ride on." The leader's eyes lit up with greed as Ezra tossed the pouch to the ground between them. Now that's sensible thinking. But as the man dismounted to retrieve their treasure, his gaze lingered on Lily with an expression that made Ezra's stomach turn to ice. "You know, boys, pretty little thing like this might fetch a good price in the right places. Lot of lonely miners up in the hills with money burning holes in their pockets." That's when Ezra Blackstone discovered exactly how much fight was left in a man protecting what he loved most. The morning sun painted the rocks red as blood when Ezra heard the horses coming fast. He grabbed his rifle and pushed Lily behind their supply wagon, his heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. 4 masked riders thundered into their camp, dust swirling around their horses' hooves like angry spirits. "Well, well," the leader called out, his voice rough as tree bark. "Look what we found hiding by the creek." Ezra kept his weapon steady, but his hands shook. 4 against 1 meant trouble, especially with Lily counting on him. The little girl pressed herself against the wagon wheel, clutching her corn-husk doll so tight her knuckles went white. "We know you got gold, mountain man," another rider said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Hand it over, and maybe we ride away peaceful." The leather pouch at Ezra's side felt heavy as a stone. 3 years of back-breaking work, sifting through freezing creek water until his fingers cracked and bled. That gold meant food for winter, warm clothes for Lily, maybe even a real house with glass windows. But when he looked at the child hiding behind the wagon, something changed inside his chest. Her dark eyes watched him with complete trust, like he was her whole world. No amount of gold dust was worth more than keeping her safe. "Take it," Ezra said, throwing the pouch between them. "Take the gold and leave us be." The leader dismounted, his boots crunching on dried leaves. He picked up the pouch, testing its weight with greedy fingers. A cruel smile spread across his face as he counted the contents. "Nice howl," he said, tucking the gold into his saddlebag. "But you know what? That little half-breed girl might be worth keeping too. Pretty things like her sell for good money down in Santa Fe." Terror shot through Ezra like lightning. "You leave her alone." The bandit drew his pistol, the metal gleaming in the morning light. "Old man, you ain't in no position to make demands." That's when years of mountain living took over. Ezra dove sideways, his rifle barking flame and smoke. The shot caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's top. But the other 3 riders were already moving, their guns spitting death across the campsite. Ezra rolled behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. He could hear Lily crying behind the wagon, small and scared. One of the bandits was circling around, trying to get a clear shot. Another was reloading, cursing up a storm. The wounded leader struggled to his feet, blood soaking his shirt. "Kill the old fool," he shouted. "Take the girl alive." Ezra knew he had maybe one more shot before they overwhelmed him. His shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, and he could feel warm blood trickling down his arm. But giving up wasn't an option, not with Lily depending on him. He popped up from behind the rock and fired again. This time his aim was true, and one of the riders tumbled from his horse with a surprised yelp. The remaining 2 bandits looked at each other, suddenly less eager for a fight. "This ain't worth dying for," one of them muttered, wheeling his horse around. The wounded leader climbed back onto his mount, holding his bleeding shoulder. "This ain't over, mountain man," he snarled. "We'll be back for that girl." As the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded, Ezra slumped against the boulder. His whole body shook from the fight, and his shoulder throbbed like fire. But they were alive, and that's what mattered. Lily crept out from behind the wagon, her face streaked with tears. She knelt beside Ezra, her small hands trying to stop the blood flowing from his wound. "Don't die," she whispered over and over like a prayer. "Please don't leave me alone." Through his pain, Ezra saw something that made his heart squeeze tight. This brave little girl wasn't just some burden he'd been stuck with. She was family, the only family that mattered. He'd been too blind to see it before, but losing that gold had opened his eyes. "I ain't going nowhere, little bird," he promised, using the pet name that felt right on his tongue. "We're sticking together, you and me." Winter hit Cedar Ridge like an angry bear, bringing snow so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Ezra and Lily had found shelter in the settlement, him chopping wood for the general store, her helping the schoolteacher with the little ones. His wounded shoulder had healed crooked, but it worked well enough. They'd built themselves a small life in the 3 months since the bandit attack. Lily laughed more now, played with the other children, even called him Papa when she thought nobody was listening. For the first time since his wife died, Ezra felt something like happiness warming his chest. That's when Samuel Crowley came back. The merchant arrived with a wagon train full of supplies and a smile that reminded Ezra of a snake sizing up a mouse. Crowley found him at the schoolhouse, watching through the frosty window as Lily taught 2 young boys their letters. "Blackstone," Crowley said, his breath making white puffs in the cold air. "Heard you ran into some trouble up north. Lost all your gold to bandits, they say." Ezra turned slowly, his hand moving to the knife on his belt. Something about Crowley's tone made his skin crawl like ants were marching up his spine. "What do you want, Crowley?" The merchant pulled out a thick roll of paper money, more cash than Ezra had seen in his whole life. "My friends back in St. Louis are still interested in buying that half-breed girl. Price has gone up too. What with the railroad bringing more civilization to these parts." Inside the schoolhouse, Lily looked up from her teaching and saw Crowley through the window. Her face went pale as fresh snow, and Ezra could see the old fear creeping back into her eyes. "I told you before," Ezra said, his voice low and dangerous. "The child ain't for sale." "Everything's got a price, mountain man." Crowley waved the money like a flag. "This much green could buy you a real farm, maybe down in Kansas, where the living's easier. What's one little girl against all that?" Other folks had started to gather around them, drawn by the raised voices. The school teacher, Mrs. Henderson, stepped outside with a worried frown. Even the preacher stopped his wood chopping to listen. "That girl means nothing to you," Crowley continued, his voice getting louder. "You ain't her real father. She's just another mouth to feed, another burden weighing you down. Be smart about this, Blackstone." Through the schoolhouse window, Lily pressed her face against the glass. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. She'd learned long ago that crying never changed anything. Ezra looked at that small, scared face and felt something break open in his chest. All the walls he'd built around his heart after his wife died came tumbling down like a house of cards. "Mister," he said, his voice carrying clear across the frozen ground, "that little girl in there is worth more than all the money in your wagon." The crowd grew quiet, sensing something important was about to happen. Mrs. Henderson nodded approval, and the preacher set down his axe to listen better. "She ain't my blood," Ezra continued, his words getting stronger with each breath. "But she's my daughter just the same. She's brave and smart and kind, and any man who wants to take her from me will have to answer for it." Crowley's smile faltered. He hadn't expected this kind of fight from the broken mountain man. "You're making a mistake, Blackstone," the merchant warned. "That money could change your whole life." "My life already changed," Ezra replied, looking straight at Lily through the window. "The day I stopped seeing her as a burden and started seeing her as a blessing." Inside the schoolhouse, Lily's tears stopped falling. A smile, bright as sunshine after rain, spread across her face. She pressed her small hand against the glass, and Ezra put his own hand up to match it. The crowd began to murmur their approval. These were frontier people who understood that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about choice, about standing up for what mattered most. Crowley looked around at the unfriendly faces surrounding him and realized he'd lost this battle before it began. With a curse, he stuffed his money back in his coat and stalked toward his wagon. "This ain't over," he called back. "That girl will never be anything but a half-breed burden, and you'll regret not taking my offer." But Ezra wasn't listening anymore. He was already walking toward the schoolhouse, toward the little girl who'd taught him that some treasures couldn't be bought or sold. The schoolhouse door slammed so hard, it rattled the windows, making every child inside jump like startled rabbits. Samuel Crowley stood in the doorway, snow melting off his expensive coat, his eyes scanning the room like a hungry wolf, searching for prey. Behind him, two rough-looking men blocked the exit, their hands resting on their gun belts. "There she is." Crowley pointed straight at Lily, who froze beside the chalkboard where she'd been helping little Tommy with his numbers. "The half-breed girl I told you about." Ezra rose from his chair near the window, his healing shoulders screaming in protest. The children sensed danger the way animals do before a storm. They huddled together, their innocent faces turning between the adults like they were watching a terrible game unfold. "You need to leave," Ezra said quietly, but his voice carried the kind of warning that made smart men step back. Crowley laughed, pulling out a thick roll of money that seemed to glow green in the afternoon light, streaming through the frost-covered windows. $500, Blackstone. More than you'll see in 10 years of chopping wood and mending fences. All for one little girl who ain't even yours by blood." The schoolmarm, Mrs. Henderson, gathered the other children behind her desk like a mother hen protecting her chicks. But her eyes stayed locked on Lily, who stood frozen in the center of the room, her small hands clenched into fists. "She belongs with civilized folks," one of Crowley's men added, stepping closer to Lily. "Rich family in St. Louis already picked her out from the photograph. They'll give her fancy dresses, proper schooling, teach her to be a lady instead of some wild mountain girl." Lily's voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "I don't want fancy dresses. I want to stay with Papa." The word Papa hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Crowley's confident smile faltered for just a moment, but then he recovered, waving the money again. "Papa?" Crowley sneered. "This broken-down prospector ain't your papa, girl. Your real papa already threw you away once. At least I'm offering good money for the trouble." That's when something inside Ezra snapped like a dry twig underfoot. 3 years of carrying guilt. 3 years of treating this brave little girl like a burden instead of a blessing. 3 years of running from the very thing his heart wanted most. It all crashed down on him at once. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between Crowley and Lily. The other children watched with wide eyes, as this quiet mountain man they barely knew began to transform into something fierce and protective. "You're right. About one thing," Ezra said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Her blood papa did throw her away, but I'm not him. I'm the man who holds her when she has nightmares about being sold again. I'm the man who taught her to read by firelight and showed her how to track deer through snow. I'm the man who nearly died protecting her from men just like you." Crowley's face darkened. "Pretty words don't change facts, Blackstone. You got no legal claim to her, no papers, no adoption, nothing. She's property of the territorial government, and I got the right to take her." But Ezra was no longer listening to threats. He knelt down beside Lily, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders, speaking loud enough for everyone in that schoolhouse to hear every single word. "Lily, do you remember what I promised you that night when the bad men came?" She nodded, tears starting to shine in her dark eyes. "Say it out loud, little bird. Let everyone hear what family really means." Her voice came out small but crystal clear. "You said I was yours to protect, yours to love, yours to keep safe, always." "That's right." Ezra stood up, facing Crowley, with the quiet confidence of a man who'd finally found his purpose. "She's my daughter now, not by blood, but by choice. And anyone who wants to take her will have to go through me first." 6 months later, the sound of Lily's laughter danced across the meadow like music, mixing with the gentle splash of Cache Creek and the whisper of wind through prairie grass. She stood knee-deep in the stream, her dress tucked up to keep it dry, teaching their new neighbor boy how to spot the flash of trout hiding in the shadows beneath the rocks. "You have to be patient, Danny," she explained, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone much older. "Papa says the best things in life come to those who wait and watch and learn." Ezra looked up from the fence post he was setting, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Their small farm wasn't much to look at yet, just a sturdy cabin, a chicken coop, and enough cleared land for a vegetable garden. But it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with something more valuable than gold. Danny Wilson, the 8-year-old son of their nearest neighbors, had become Lily's constant companion since his family settled the land upstream. His parents, grateful for Ezra's help getting established, often sent over fresh bread or offered to watch Lily when Ezra had business in town. "There!" Lily suddenly shouted, pointing at a silver flash in the water. "Did you see it?" "I saw it! I saw it!" Danny jumped up and down, sending water splashing everywhere, which made both children dissolve into giggles. Ezra smiled, remembering another child by another stream, asking if he would sell her like her first papa had. The memory still hurt, but now it was the kind of hurt that reminded him how far they'd traveled together. Mrs. Henderson approached from the direction of the cabin, carrying a basket that smelled like fresh-baked apple pie. The schoolmarm had become a regular visitor, especially after the incident with Crowley had made her realize what kind of man Ezra really was underneath his rough exterior. "The children seem to have caught more laughter than fish," she observed, setting the basket down on the wooden table Ezra had built under the old oak tree. "Sometimes that's the better catch," Ezra replied, joining her in the shade. Through the window of their cabin, he could see the corn-husk doll sitting on the mantel, no longer a comfort for a scared little girl, but a reminder of how far they'd both come. "Any word from the territorial office about the adoption papers?" Mrs. Henderson asked quietly. Ezra nodded toward where Lily was now showing Danny how to build a dam with river rocks. "Judge Morrison said they'll be ready next month, official and legal, just like it should be." But even as he said the words, Ezra knew the truth that had taken him too long to understand. Those papers wouldn't make Lily his daughter. She already was, had been from the moment she'd asked if he would sell her and broken his heart wide open. "Papa, Papa, come see," Lily called out, her face bright with excitement. "We built something amazing." As Ezra walked toward the creek, Mrs. Henderson watched the way this gruff mountain man's entire expression softened at the sound of that little girl's voice. She'd seen a lot of families in her years of teaching, but rarely had she witnessed love this pure, this hard-won, this absolutely unshakable. The children had indeed built something amazing, a small dam that created a perfect swimming hole, clear enough to see all the way to the bottom where smooth stones caught the afternoon sunlight like scattered jewels. "It's beautiful," Ezra said, and meant it completely. "Just like home," Lily added, slipping her wet hand into his calloused one. As the sun began to set over the Wyoming Territory in that summer of 1880, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ezra Blackstone understood finally what real treasure looked like. It wasn't metal you dug from the ground or money you earned through backbreaking labor. It was this: a child's trust, freely given. A home built with love instead of loneliness. The knowledge that when tomorrow came, someone would be glad to see you awake and alive and ready to face whatever the day might bring. The corn-husk doll on the mantel had served its purpose, comforting a scared little girl through the darkest nights of uncertainty. Now it stood as a silent witness to transformation, how two broken souls had found each other in the wilderness and discovered that families aren't born, they're chosen, one brave decision at a time.